Hi, and welcome back to the Drama Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. We're going to be talking all about what it means to defy and how this can actually be a positive thing. So, all my people pleasers out there, this is for you. Today, I am chatting with Cornell psychologist and trained doctor, Dr. Sunita Sa. So, she's going to explore the factors that keep us acquiescent, shall we say, and how those factors impact our health. Dr. Sa is an award-winning professor at Cornell University, an expert in organizational psychology. And she has led groundbreaking research on influence, authority, compliance, and defiance. Also a trained physician, she practiced medicine in the United Kingdom and also worked as a management consultant for the pharmaceutical industry. She currently teaches executives, leaders, and students in healthcare and business. So Dr. Sa is also a sought-after international speaker and consultant, advisor to governmental agencies, and former commissioner of the National Commission on Forensic Science. And she's widely published. Her multidisciplinary research and her analyses have appeared in leading academic journals and media entities that you might be familiar with, such as the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Harvard Business Review, and Scientific American, and, just to name a few. So she is the author of a great new book called DEFY, The Power of No in a World That Demands Yes. So we dig into this topic today in our interview, and I just know you guys are going to love what she has to share. So let's get to the episode. Welcome to Drama Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here.
I'm so grateful that we were able to speak today. I love what you're doing, and I'm so excited about your new book and just this message. But I love to ask my guests on here their origin stories, and I just would love to know, whatever you'd like to share with us. What inspired you to do the work that you do today?
Well, when I was a child, I was known for being an obedient daughter and student. And I remember asking my dad at some point when I was young, what does my name Sunita mean? And he said, in Sanskrit, Sunita means good. And mostly I lived up to that. So I was good, according to, in their eyes. So I did what I was told. I got up when I was told to. I did all my homework like they expected. I even had my hair cut the way my parents wanted me to. And these were the messages I received from parents, from community, from teachers to do as you're told, not make a fuss, obey authority, and not make, just fit in, comply, obey. And there could be messages that many of us get as children, particularly girls. We get those messages growing up. And it's a dynamic that's familiar to many the children of first-generation immigrants to strict upbringing and working hard, high expectations. And I went along with that for a very long time, but I was always fascinated by the people that could defy and what that single powerful word defy actually means. And I wanted to really look at that in more depth. I mean, there were so many times, and maybe you've also felt times when you've wanted to object to something or disagree or not do something, but you end up just going along with it, swallowing your words and just sighing and shaking your head and then going along with the thing that you didn't want to do. And I believe so many of us comply more than we actually think we do because we become socialized, we become wired to comply, as I say. And the main reason is that we start equating compliance with being good and defiance with being bad, because that's what we were told so often growing up. And we were rewarded for being compliant and not rewarded for being defiant. And so that it can become a serious problem. And when I started to look at this in more depth, I found that, for example, 1 in 10 healthcare workers, most of them nurses, only 1 in 10 find it comfortable to speak up when they see their colleagues making an error. And there was a similar survey of over 1,700 crew members and commercial airlines, and nearly half of them did not speak up when they saw their superiors making a mistake. So these are life and death decisions, medicine and on airlines. But it doesn't have to be life and death decisions. Just going along with others and not speaking up when we know something is wrong can leave us quite drained and muted, really. And it got me thinking, is it sometimes bad to be good? And what do we sacrifice when we put aside our values so often? And I really wanted to look at that more in depth, that feeling that I had of being drained and muted and going along with other people's expectations, that really inspired my work and research.
Everything you're saying is resonating with just so we're sitting here recording this. This is the end of 2024. Well, not the end. Okay, we're in Q4 2024. Not the end yet. But I would love to. So in your book, Defy, the Power of No in a World That Demands Yes. So you deconstruct the myth that defiance is a negative trait. I love that so much. Why is this topic so important right now?
So I do deconstruct that myth about defiance being negative and aggressive and even loud. And I've spent decades now looking and studying about influence and advice and authority. And what I've found that is crucial, and it really substantially changed how I think, is that we've misunderstood what it means to defy. And I came to this revelation that we need a new definition for defiance. So the old definition is that to defy is to challenge the power of another person, to resist boldly and openly. And my new definition is that to defy is to simply act in accordance with your true values when there's pressure to do otherwise. And the reason why I think this is so important is that there's a wonderful quote by C.P. Snow, who says, when you think about the long history of man, you will find more hideous crimes that have been committed in the name of obedience than has ever been committed in the name of rebellion. So I actually think it's a timeless issue for an increasingly polarized world that we live in. As I said, as a child, I believed what the adults taught me, that being obedient, being compliant was good, and authority figures were to be trusted, and I should do as I'm told. But I also saw firsthand how the teachers can abuse that authority. They could even physically assault bad students in the name of discipline or order. And then later, when I went to university, I read about Stanley Milgram's landmark study of obedience, where many of the participants complied with these orders to administer what they thought were life-threatening electric shocks to another person. So just because the experimenter, told them to shock somebody else, they did. And that was when I started to question as well, is obedience something that we should always strive for? But a real turning point for me was George Floyd's murder in 2020, when I watched that scene unfold, and especially when I looked at the rookie officers, I saw echoes of Milgram's subjects from the 1960s in those officers who were just complying with their orders of their training officer. And then I realized, despite all the historical lessons that we've had, despite all the research on influence and what we know, our propensity to obey and to comply is still as strong and as dangerous as ever. So we always believe that we'll do the right thing in the circumstances. That's why we're so judgmental of other people that, don't do the right thing. But often we just freeze. We're confused and we're unprepared. And so we fail to put our values into action. So this aspect of reframing defiance for me is really important. If we can reframe it as a positive, proactive force in society and realize all these individual actions that we take build up to the society we live in, I think this is a timeless issue, really, that to create the society that we want.
Absolutely. And you touched on some really powerful stuff. And I know this is just scratching the surface, but what would you want maybe to share with our listeners of some of the reasons why we say yes when we actually mean no, or when it is not in alignment with our values?
Well, yeah. So many of us might be familiar with the fact that we say yes when we'd rather say no to things. And there's a few reasons. And we actively resist defying. We resist defiance because we're wired to comply. And because it's so difficult, it's difficult for a lot of people to defy an order, even an unspoken one at times, from an authority or a peer. And even as I've seen in some of the experiments that I've run and the research that I've done, even from a stranger, it's difficult to defy. So I found 3 key reasons for why this happens. First of all, this enormous pressure to go along with others. Second, we don't really understand what compliance and defiance actually are and what they mean, what true consent is and what true dissent is. And third, once we defy, we might not know how. We might not have the ability to defy because we've never been taught it, we've never practiced it, we don't know how to do it. And so for those 3 reasons, we often end up saying yes when we say no. So if you just take one of those, which is that pressure to comply, I'm going to tell you about some of my research in here where I uncovered this psychological process I call insinuation anxiety. And this is our anxiety to give a negative evaluation about another person to that person. We don't want to insinuate that somebody else could possibly be wrong, incompetent, biased, unfair, corrupt, unethical, or just plain stupid, right? You just don't want to tell somebody else that, right? You don't want to tell your hairdresser that they've done a bad job and given you a bad,
Right.
like most people, maybe not people in New York City, but a lot of people don't want to tell the taxi driver if they're taking the very long route round. Right?
That's a good distinction. New York is a little different that way.
So it happens in these small stake situations, but it can also happen in larger situations that we don't tell our doctor when they're telling us something that we disagree with or they're not understanding us. And it could also explain why the nurses don't speak up when they see an error or why co-pilots don't tell their pilots when they're making a mistake. So this insinuation anxiety, the reluctance to insinuate anything negative about another person can be very powerful, and it can come up regardless of the stakes, whether it's life-threatening or something minor. And so that's an important source of social pressure that keeps us compliant. It keeps us saying yes when we'd rather say no.
Thank you for sharing that. Those are really, really great examples of what that can look like. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that. I think that you laid the foundation really well for us for this next question, but how might this tendency to say yes or to not tell someone that they're wrong or they're missing the point or they're not listening to you or they're doing it wrong, how might that negatively impact our own well-being, and or how might that extend to those around us?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the costs of defying or not defying, people often focus on the costs of defying. So, I don't really want to defy. I don't want to say no because I might lose my boss. I might lose my friends or a relationship, or I might be embarrassed. And you really don't want your nurse or your pilot, co-pilot thinking those things. But what we don't understand is also there's substantial costs for not defying, for saying yes continuously, for constantly putting your values aside, bowing your head to other people. It has an impact on our health and well-being, psychologically, spiritually, physically. It has an effect. And when we think about how does it affect other people, well, some of the examples I've given a life or death example, so we can see that. But also an example that comes to mind was in a book written by Michelle Lamont titled How Professors Think. And this really stood out to me, being a professor and being in many faculty meetings. And it's a story about a female academic. She's a woman of color, and she is on a grant committee. So she's evaluating grants, and she's on this committee with 4 more senior white men. And when it comes to a particular application, they start discussing the application, and she felt like they were being influenced by gossip rather than the quality of the application. And she really wanted to say something, and she couldn't. And what she said, the one thing that I wanted to do was the one thing I couldn't do. And that was speak up, because she didn't want to imply that these 4 men that she just met were not being ethical, that they lacked integrity, or they were being unfair. She just found it so difficult. And when these things happen, it affects others, even if they don't know about it. It affects them. Society remains unfair. It remains biased. We end up with systemic discrimination, and it's how injustices are sustained. So these types of decisions I've seen firsthand can be influenced by gossip. It can affect the grants. It can affect research, applicants' promotions. And that knock-on effect, we don't know how it affects the applicant and their career and going forwards, their family. So culture is always affected by these individual decisions of not speaking up, and also by the group of men in this case, right? For sure. But it really creates a society based on fear, where only a few people dominate and have power, and the rest of us are expected to comply or there's consequences.
Now, I want to shift that a little bit, actually. And I want to talk about some of the, we'll say, benefits of defiance, things that, positive things that might come from defying.
So one of the great things about defying is it allows you to be more yourself. Right? You can live in alignment with who you truly are, or who you wish to be, who you aspire to be, or your aspirational self. And that gives you more joy. It's a more honest life. I want to tell you a story that stayed with me about the benefits of defiance. That I remember it very vividly. And I was about 6 or 7, and I was walking home with my mum from the grocery store. And she was dragging along our rickety shopping cart, like a little luggage cart with 2 wheels. And we were walking home. It was quite a long walk back, and we had to go through this narrow alleyway. And in that alleyway, we were confronted with about 7 teenage boys, and they blocked our path and they wouldn't let us pass. And they started shouting out some racist comments, "Go back home." And my reaction to that was instant. So I grabbed my mum's arm and I wanted to avert my gaze from the boys. And I just wanted to quickly maneuver through them to get through the alleyway so we could get home. And my mom, she's very small. Like, she was taller than me at the time, but now she's like a 4'10", so she's petite. She was wearing her blue sari, and she had her hair sort of neatly plaited back in a single braid at the back. And if we think about compliance and defiance as binary, which is, I found that it's not, but if we think about it in that way, which I did at the time, I'd neatly put my mom in the compliant box. So she did all the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry. She looked after the family. I found a very compliant person, subservient, always looking after other people. But that day she did something that surprised me. So she stopped and she put the shopping cart up vertical like this. And she put one hand on her hip and she said to the boys, "What do you mean?" And I was a bit horrified at that point. I grabbed her arm even more and I whispered to her, "Come on, Ma." And she shrugged me off. And she shook me off. She said, "No." And she looked at the boys directly in their eyes and she said, "What do you mean? You think you're such strong boys, right? Big, tough boys." And she started telling them off in broken English. And I was just so surprised. And the boys looked at each other and didn't quite know what to do. And then one of them said, "Let's go." And then they dispersed. My mum grabbed the shopping cart and then she continued walking really fast home. And I kind of stood there frozen, like, what just happened? What did my mum do? And then I ran after her. And that story has stayed with me for so long because it showed me a couple of major things. So first of all, it showed me that anyone can be defiant. Right? It's not a character trait. It's a skill, so we can choose to utilize it or not. So compliance might be our default, but it's not our destiny. And second, what it showed me that is defiance can transform you, right, with some of the benefits of defiance that I've discussed. It can transform you, but it also can affect the people who observe it. It has this ripple effect. I call it the defiance domino effect. That it only takes one person to start a reaction that makes a great difference. And if we can all learn how to defy, because as I said, society is built on these smaller moments. And ideally, it would have been great if one of those teenage boys would have become what I call a moral maverick and would have spoken up to his peers to tell them to stop so my immigrant mother wouldn't have to do so. That's the type of society that I hope we can aspire to.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. That's really powerful. And I can see how that would stay with you.
Yeah, it's affected me a lot. And maybe it encouraged me to do the work that I'm doing now.
So, okay, in your book, you argue that defying, as we've been talking about, enables us to live more in accordance with our values, grant ourselves emotional and physical freedom. And so for someone who's so used to saying yes, I'm laughing because I can identify with that. I am the child of a people pleaser. That's definitely part of the culture I grew up in. For anyone who is used to saying yes, regardless of what they really feel inside, how can that person start to make choices that are more aligned with their physical, mental, and emotional needs?
Yeah, that's a great question because it comes to why do we say yes when we mean no? Like But it's like we don't know how a lot of the time. So how can we start? And one of the things, there's a couple of things. So first of all, we really need a mindset shift. So if we think about defiance as being loud and bold and violent or angry and aggressive or superhuman or out of reach, we need to know that's not the case. You don't have to be a superhero. You don't have to have a strong personality or be larger than life. You don't even have to be brave. You have to, it's for all of us. It's available and necessary for all of us. And we can find our own unique way to be defiant with less angst. And we start this by asking ourselves certain questions like, does this situation go against my values? Because what we want is values-based defiance rather than knee-jerk reactions. But we can't just wish ourselves to be defiant. We need to practice beforehand. And the way to do that is, first of all, make defiance a practice. We need an action plan long before the moment of crisis happens. So as I said, defiance is not a character skill. It's not a personality. It's a practice. And the way to do this is, first of all, start anticipating situations where you might have to defy. Very much think with my mum, she'd encountered that situation before with the boys. And because she used to come home and she would be muttering away. And I just thought she was upset at the shopping cart. But she must have encountered those boys before. And maybe that day she did something different because she was anticipating it. Maybe because I was present, she wanted to show me something. So often we can predict these situations, not all of them, but many of them. Like at work, I know I'm going to hear certain comments. I'm going to hear certain unfair things. I'm going to hear some biased things. So we can start anticipating the situations that we are likely to face either at work or elsewhere. Maybe we faced it before and we regretted not saying anything. Then we can start to visualize it, because visualizing it is a great way to picture what could happen, and we can start practicing. We can start creating scripts. What do we wish we had said? And start role-playing it and practicing it. And why this is so important is that practice is what changes the neurons pathways. It changes the neural pathways and allows us to basically rewire ourselves so we can become more defiant and more our aspirational selves. There's a wonderful quote that's often attributed to Bruce Lee about training, but it's actually a Greek poet that said, "Under duress, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." And so knowing that is that we have to practice that skill of defiance. So even with the small acts, if you don't like your haircut, speak up and say something. If the taxi driver takes a long route, let's just say something. And we can start with curiosity as to, why are you doing that? Or as my mom said, what do you mean by that? If you come across a racist or a sexist remark.
What do you mean by that? That is so powerful. I did that once. I still remember it. And it was, someone made a comment that I was going to walk away. And then I was just like, no, you know what? I have to challenge this. I have to understand, because I would have been stewing over it for hours. And it really changed the power dynamic within myself, but also just the situation. It ended up being a really good opportunity for both of us to learn something. It was really, I remember in the moment afterwards walking away being like, wow, I can't believe I did that. It was like so
fantastic.
Different. It was, yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a powerful phrase, just that simple. What do you mean by that? It's a wonderful one to use.
So I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here today. This has been you've shared so much incredible knowledge, and I'm really excited to share with our listeners. And if people are listening, they want to learn more, they want to buy your book, connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I'm very easy to find. I have a website, sunitasar.com. So that's SUNITA. SAR is SAH.com. And you can also find my newsletter. It's on Substack. It's called Defiant by Design. Just connect with me. You can find all the information there. I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you just Google Sunita Sar at Cornell or go to sunitasar.com, you should find me pretty easily.
And we'll be sure to link to all that in our show notes. So, Sunita, I just want to say thank you again. And I have one more question for you. This is a question I ask all my guests because I just love how many different ways there are to interpret this question. And that is, what does healthy living mean to you?
Well, discovering your true yes or your true no, I actually think is an act of wellness and self-knowledge. So healthy living to me is not running away from difficult questions or uncomfortable questions that we have to ask ourselves, right? It's about knowing your values and living an authentic life based on them, because we're all so busy and so compliant that we just get on and we say yes so much and we get on with our day. But if you don't uncover your purpose, somebody else is going to find one for you. So, but if you can live your life in alignment with your values, I think it's a more honest, authentic life, one that can give us joy. And ultimately, you can be more healthy. It's an act of wellness.
Incredible. Thank you. I love that way of looking at it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to be here.
And for all of you guys who are listening, I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. They do matter and help me continue to bring you great guests. And as always, guys, like, share, subscribe. And also, I love hearing from you. Please send me a DM on Instagram at Jess Cording, or, you can post a screenshot of yourself listening, tag me and Dr. Shaw here. And yes, I love that you guys come back to listen to these episodes. I love that you have shared how much of a resource this is for you. As always, thank you for your time and energy, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. And just one more thing. I may be a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. The information in this podcast is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. It is also not a replacement for individual counseling. Always check with your healthcare provider for questions related to your own health and well-being. We'll see you next time.